Hello and welcome to Broken Entertainment. So, it's interesting how life and history and the process of the world moving forward has an impact on our writing. And I'd kind of debated talking about this subject because it's still ongoing and it's still, there's a lot of emotion behind it and a lot of politics behind it. But we're not going to get into the politics of it. I just want to talk about my novel that is now very close to beta readers. And this book I have been writing forever. I feel like George R. R. Martin on this one. Okay, so and a lot of that's just because I didn't give it the focus and attention it deserved for a long time. I just kind of wrote it when I had some time and the inclination, and it was before I realized you really have to make this a job. When I started writing this book, Afghanistan had really it had been ongoing for some time. It was probably 10 years in. And setting the first part of the book in Afghanistan made a lot of sense. So the thing with Invasion, it's sci-fi, it's science fantasy book really, and it's about a guy who is in the U.S. military and the army specifically, and he gets in a big fight with his wife at the beginning of the book because he wants to go on one more tour of duty to Afghanistan because his unit has been largely replaced with a bunch of really young kids, and he just wants to make sure that they get home because it's the kind of guy he is. And she doesn't want him to go. She's against war in general. She's against Afghanistan in particular, and she doesn't want him to go. She wants him to retire. She wants him to start a life, to start a family, and so they have this fight. He goes. And while he's over there, alien invasion happens. And the book is about him trying to get home from Afghanistan. And most of the book, parts of the book take place in Afghanistan. A large chunk of it takes place in Iran, and other parts of it take place in the United States through different character perspectives. And I'm like, wow, it had never really even occurred to me that might at some point date the book, which I guess is a commentary in its own right. But it's fine because I can date the book. All I gotta do is put a timestamp on it. Not every science fantasy book has to take place in our future because no matter where you set it, no matter where you intend it to take place, it's going to take place at some point. It will be taking place in the past from the perspective of the reader. So that's not a big deal. And then, as stuff was ongoing with the evacuations, it occurred to me that all of a sudden my book, especially the third book in the series, took on a whole different meaning. And I don't want to spoil too much, or anything really if I have to, but suffice to say that what we're seeing informs the third book. And not intentionally, I didn't set out to do that, but that's kind of the interesting thing about writing, isn't it? And it's kind of the interesting thing about reading. An author can write something, and at the time, it doesn't have a certain meaning, and then something happens in the real world, and all of a sudden, meaning gets applied. And we've seen this happen, just for example, I think it's a very clear example, the wreck of the Titan, which I talked about in another video, where somebody wrote a book about a big steam ocean liner hitting an iceberg, sinking, and almost everyone on board dying. And at the time it came out, everybody was like, yeah, it's a book. Then the Titanic sinks. And now it's a book about the Titanic. So whether or not we intend for our writing to have certain influences or to be read in a certain light doesn't matter, because things can happen and it changes the perspective of that reading. I'll tell you another story about that book. particularly book 2, which draft 0 of book 2 is already done. These other books won't take as long, I promise. I had a scene in there that was fine when I wrote it. And then something happened in real life in the news. And I don't want to get into particular details because YouTube will, do YouTube things. But something happened and I said, this is too close. And I pulled it from the book. No, I'm not going to change anything with Afghanistan. And understanding how the third book in particular can reflect on things just gives me the power to kind of forge that book in a very compelling way. It's very interesting to me, though, and it's not something I had really put a lot of thought into before, is the way that these real-life events change how stories and books are perceived by the readers, where an author may not have been making a certain message, or may not have been saying, oh, look at this parallel. But then something happens, and all of a sudden, there's parallels. Wreck of the Titan is probably the clearest example I can think of. There are others, I'm sure, but it's the one that comes to mind. And, people asked him after the Titanic sank, oh, did you have premonitions? Did you have paranormal experience? And he's like, no, I wrote a book. I mean, it said I understood the industry. I knew where things could lead eventually, and that informed my writing. The Titanic sinking was unrelated. It happened later, and it informed how people read that book, renewed popularity in that book for a time. I didn't set out to write a trilogy about Afghanistan. I was actually writing a trilogy that drew parallels intentionally from various wars over time. Vietnam, in particular, the American Revolution as well, where you have underdog powers taking on significantly higher powers. And it's just interesting, isn't it? How things in the real world can influence how people read and write and consume entertainment. Like I said, it would be easy to go on to political tangents and stuff, but that's not what we do here. But I think it's something to be aware of as you're writing. Something could happen while you're writing that provides your book an allegory you weren't building, or draws in an allegory or a parallel you weren't building into it. And that's okay. You don't have to go back and rewrite things, because you can't stop it. Whatever happens, stuff's going to happen. And you're going to have, once the book is out there, it's out there. Unless you want to be like George Lucas and go back and re-edit stuff over and over again. How many versions of Star Wars have we had now? But it's something, I think, to keep in mind. And if you do see something happen, it's okay to tap into that. There's no reason you can't. Unless now we're talking allegory and parallels here. If you're talking about direct, agenda messaging crap, then you're going to have problems, because nobody wants that, A. And B, there are people that could be directly affected by what you're dealing with. And if you're not using allegory where they'll go, oh, that sounds a lot like this, but instead where you just say it, they're going to take it in a different light, and it's not going to be one that you want them to take it in. So, moving forward with Invasion, I haven't had time to work on it the last couple of days because a whole bunch of stuff happened, I got sick. It's a cold. Um, Other stuff happened that just kind of took away the time to work on it. But I'm gonna get back to it today and moving forward. I've been doing a heavy re-edit of the final battle, and that is very nearly done. And once I'm done, the rest of the ending should spill out pretty easily, and then off to beta readers it goes. And I'm gonna flip over and finish Project Agent and put that out there so I can have a published story you can read, and then I'll probably produce a couple of follow-ups to it while also working on draft 1, not draft 0, draft 1 of book 2 of Invasion, which is Shadow of the Directorate, where we go from a man trying to get home to his family and people trying to cope with this massive, massive invasion to the politics and the backstabbing and the shadow play that follows. And that's a really fun book. I think people will really enjoy it. Handwritten, so I got to type it in, but that helps me as part of my editing process, helps me reprocess everything I've written and sort of edit as I enter it. And then once that is in the editing phase and I have a couple of short stories out, I'll be working on my fantasy novel again, and we'll be going from there. You know, let me know your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments down below. You know, it's unexpected. It's tragic, and you know, it's kind of like, wow, and I've got this thing attached to my book unintentionally. But I think it's a good thing. For writing perspective wise, I think being able to have those parallels is a good thing. And I don't think, given the parallels I was already using, it wasn't really avoidable if something happened. But let me know what you think in the comments. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, please consider subscribing. Hit the bell for notifications, and I will see you next time.